2. Let's try this again. If you guys can hear us, let us know. It looks like it's coming through on my end, but let's make sure we're good. Checking with our external producers.
Mic check. Mic check. 1 2 1 2. 1 2. Good.
We're back. We're back. Let's try this again. Our apologies. So we are back. As we were saying just a few moments ago, when you guys could not hear us, we're excited about tonight's episode. We've got a special guest. I'll let Demetrius talk about him. But we're excited about tonight because we're talking about mental health. And as you know, this is a month that is considering mental health. So with that in mind, we're excited about it and would like for you guys to be sharing this, start your watch parties, tag someone, especially those with whom you know deals with mental health.
That's right. So I mentioned on Sunday as I preached through Jonah, and I preached Jonah chapter 3, or rather Jonah chapter 4. And so I preached Jonah 3 on Sunday. I taught Jonah 4 on Tuesday in our Bible study. And I talked about, obviously, we can see through Jonah's life story that he was dealing with some mental health issues, running from God, then praying to God, then preaching for God, then having to be taught by God and sit down by God. And so we see that in his life, but the beauty of Scripture is that it not only lets us know what Jonah was going through, but it also lets us know what we go through. And so I tell you that this is an important topic, an important discussion, because we don't want you to suffer alone. Mm-hmm. We don't want you to be underwater. Both Anthony and I have been through times that we've been stressed, that we've been bombarded with cares and concerns, and sometimes we just have to talk to one another. Have to talk to our wives, talk to somebody just to help navigate. And probably the most important thing is that we don't want you to go through this alone. And so we want to be an outlet, we want to be a help, we want to be an encouragement as you go through this season, and especially in light of the pandemic.
Yes.
That's obviously carried with it a whole different set of circumstances. You know, talk about that maybe a little bit, Anthony.
Yeah, you know, the pandemic hit us all off guard. It shocked us. But in addition to that, you still got to deal with the social distancing and the social isolation. So not being able to be close with people, but at the same time, having that sense of isolation. And I'm just certain that has something to do with our mental capacity because we're people. And we're used to being around people. We're used to touching one another and communicating freely. And now it seems like there's all these restrictions. That's right. And so because of that, I'm certain that it has an impact, but I don't want to go by my gut feeling or what I kind of believe. You know, we've got a professional who can let us know as to how some of those things are.
Exactly. So several weeks ago, as we were planning out what it is we were going to do each of the weeks, one of the person who came to our mind immediately is Ben Roberts III. He's a licensed professional counselor and just has a wealth of knowledge. He works in the mental health field, and that's what he does by trade. That's what he's been trained to do. But he's also an incredible preacher. And so we thank God for what he's doing in his life, not only from the mental health space, but also working for God. And of course, many people know his dad, Brother Ben Roberts, and so we're grateful for the relationship that we've been able to enjoy, and so we want to welcome Ben in right now.
All right, Ben, you are with us. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I am so happy to be here and to be with you all. Can y'all hear me and see me?
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear and see
we can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great, but yeah, it's great to be here, and I really appreciate you all doing this and shining some light on mental health and mental illness.
Yeah, we appreciate you as well, Ben. Of course, you know that you took my place as my daughter's favorite preacher.
Oh.
Ben came and preached for us at Carmack a couple of years ago and did an incredible job of really navigating through a difficult text and some And my daughter said, "Oh, he is an incredible preacher." And said, "Oh, he's one of my favorites." I said, "Hey, listen, you live with your favorite preacher now, and let's not change that." But
Absolutely.
it was something interesting that you shared, Ben, in that conversation that really intrigued her and really grabbed her was this whole notion of looking at your family tree and look at how you found your family tree. I don't want to dig into that too much because I want to save that for the end. But that was interesting that the person at the library said for you to look through the livestock section, and you may be able to find your family there. And so that grabbed her attention, that grabbed her, and it was interesting. I think that even maybe frames a little bit of how our mental health state is in people of color. And but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But I think that Anthony and I have some questions for you, but we want to say this is that for everybody that's joining us tonight, we'd like for you to give us some questions. What are you struggling with? What are you going through? What is it that you have challenges with? And if you would share those comments, share those questions, so as we work through our questions and the things we prepare for Ben, that we can integrate yours in there as well. And so we would love for you to give us your questions. And please, by no means, don't be shy. Uh, as I said before, we don't want you to go through this alone, and that's why we created this space, created this platform in order for us to help one another. And so, one of the questions I wanted to share with you, Ben, is how can we, of course, oftentimes there's this stigma around mental health. We've all grew up with people in our neighborhoods and in our communities, and that we call them crazy and we call them, names or whatever. Stay away from him or stay away from her. And so sometimes in our communities, we've kind of established this stigma connected with mental health. You don't need to go to therapists. You don't need to talk to nobody. That just really confirms that you're crazy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And even those of us within the Christian context sometimes said, just have faith, just pray. And so, how would you suggest that we work towards a ways that we can take away that stigma connected with mental health?
It's a lot of what you all are doing now, and you hit the nail on the head with the things you were saying. It's always been around. It's just how people have been approaching it and what they've been calling it. And for especially for Black people, we have had a a watchful eye on um, the legal system and the health system, right? Hospitals, we don't really trust it. So, which is rightfully true. We should have this healthy suspicion of institutions, right? Because of the way they've treated Black and brown people historically.
Yeah.
But the way that we start to really get people help and assistance is starting off with exposure.
Mm.
It's a lot of what you're doing now,
Yeah.
using the correct language of what's going on with someone. We can call it all types of things, but what's going to be helpful in helping individuals move forward and get healthier, if that makes sense. So exposure, exposure, exposure,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and really making it something that is a part of the family. So when people say, "Hey, have you talked to your therapist?" or "Have you thought about seeing a therapist?" It's not something that's negative or have a negative connotation. And I also would say promote people that look like you to become therapists,
Mm. Yeah.
right?
Mm.
Because that kills some of the stigma as well. Because we should have a healthy suspicion of institutions, and because of the way we've been treated in the past. So uh, exposure is the biggest thing. So if we can expose people to mental health, expose people to the language, expose people to what treatment might look like, and even expose them to people that look like them that are in that field. That is one of the biggest things.
That's great. That's great. That's a great answer, and I think that makes a lot of sense. A lot of sense. One of the things that during my Bible study on Tuesday that I was walking through is that I listed 8 subtle ways that you could that could help you to understand maybe if you're suffering through depression. So it talked about that if you're not sleeping well, it talked about that your diet is off, that that you're snapping, that different things. And so um, my daughter was messing with my son later on because he kind of went off about something. She said, "You may be depressed." so
Yeah, yeah.
but in truthfulness, and I said to myself, we need to know when it is that we need help. What are those signs? And so, could you talk about that maybe a little bit as far as like how do we know that I need to get some help?
I first of all, I would say I really appreciate that you named it depression so that you know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we might be dealing with something and we have those symptoms, but we don't know what it is,
Mm-hmm.
right? So especially with depression, if one thing might be isolation with depression. So when I know these symptoms about depression, and maybe I see a church member that comes and they don't shake as many hands,
Yeah.
then that becomes a red flag that maybe something's going on.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe people that show up late and leave early is not a faith thing.
Okay.
Maybe they're dealing with something deeper than that. So it starts to challenge your belief system of other things that you have to say, man, what might really be going on for an individual? And depression, clinical depression, our brain is a chemistry set.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a chemical imbalance that's going on in the brain,
Wow.
and in our interventions has to do something to help balance that chemistry that's in the brain. The brain is the organ. So to your question though, how do we know when it is time to get some assistance or uh, look outside the resources that we have available in front of us?
Yeah.
So I'm gonna go the kind of long-winded route to that. So uh, think of mental health as the example I usually love to give is if it's a cup with water in it
Mm-hmm.
and the water represents stress, we're the cup, right? Mental health is your ability to take on more water or more stress and then be able to pour some of it out,
Okay.
right?
Mm.
That creates balance.
Yeah.
I can take on stress, and then I have the necessary behavioral and cognitive skills to let go of some of that stress
Okay.
so that it does not hurt my day to day life,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, what has to happen when you don't have the necessary skills, cognitive, behavior, whatever it is, the necessary coping skills to deal with the stressors of life, and they become a challenge to your everyday life, right? Then you might need to seek someone else in order to learn new skills, new techniques, new things in your life to help manage the stress that's going on in your life, right?
Mm.
When outside resources is not helpful or not helpful, but not helpful with the amount of stress that's coming on
Mm-hmm.
that you have in front of you.
Wow.
Wow, wow, yeah, yeah. That's very insightful, and that makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Perfect sense. One of the things that kind of another question. I'm kind of switch gears a little bit here. Is that of course our family we work in the funeral business, and so as we have served families during this pandemic, we obviously have been celebrating end of life differently. We've been graveside services, limiting the number of people coming in, those different things. So obviously, the way our families are grieving and the support system they have around them has been different. So, how would you suggest for families during this new normal of being able to work through the grieving process? Obviously, the grieving process is difficult. We know people, grieve in different stages and steps, and but at the same time, what would you maybe some hints and tips you could give us as it relates to helping people to grieve when they don't have this army and family around them like normal?
Yeah, yeah, and that's not a clear cut. answer
Yeah.
because, like you said, people grieve and express grief and loss in different ways. So it's going to look different for different people. But one thing that's typically helpful for people that's going through that process, and I can imagine part of the the burial and the funeral. Part of the funeral is closure,
Yeah.
trying to get closure,
Right.
celebrating that life and trying to get some closure. So what that looks like for each family might be different,
Yeah.
but really acknowledging how you feel about what's going on is going to be one of the first steps to wherever you go.
Okay.
Uh, Acknowledgement is always the first step. If you know you're dealing with something, or if you are dealing with something and you don't first acknowledge that you're dealing with something, you'll never work on it. So when it comes to the end of life celebration or those funerals, really feeling those feels and start to work on the process of grieving not alone, but with other people within community.
Yeah.
Grieving is not something you're supposed to do by yourself. Uh, and I'm really going to promote one thing that I'm passionate about are groups. Groups work very well for people that's dealing with grief and loss. It
Mm.
it just does.
Mm-hmm.
When you get with other people who have experienced similar things, they'll be able to communicate things to you that people who are not experiencing those things they just can't do.
Mm.
So get within community of people who are dealing with different types of losses. And it doesn't have to be a death of a family member, it can be all types of losses.
That's right.
When people have lost jobs,
Yeah.
right, that's a loss.
Yeah.
Mm.
People have lost status, that's a loss. And so they're going to have to go through that grieving process as well of things that they've lost. And it looks different for different people.
That's right.
Not all grieving processes are um harmful in the long run.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay.
Yeah. That's good. You know, as that's interesting, and I think it's helpful that you just mentioned that grief is not just death. I was on a leadership Zoom, and one of the things that one of the people that was working through and talking to the leaders, they were saying that as ministers, many of us are grieving the loss of our members being in the pews. We're
Mm.
grieving the loss of ministries that we've helped to build, and now it's all of a sudden changed. It feels different, and so there's something that many of us are going through, and really acknowledging that, as you said before, is a key point. So
yeah.
yeah, yeah. So because I feel like that I've been grieving a little bit that things are so different that hey, this just feels different. How we're working through this, how we're gonna make it through this, but acknowledge it. I think that's, as you said, that's key. That's key.
There's whenever there's change, there's grief. Whenever there's some changes going on, and so to even Brother Walker's point, it was a time when we were socializing a lot, and we're not able to do that. Zoom can only go so far.
Right.
There's nothing like being in the midst of somebody that and you can actually touch and hug. You may not do that, but I mean, there's no replacement for that. So there's a level of, you know, change with there and you having to go through that process of just that.
Yeah, yeah. That's good. That's good. I think Anthony has a few questions as well.
Certainly, certainly. As we kind of get with that, one of the things I wanted to ask was, what are some of the mental and emotional implications of social distancing?
Yeah, and I think it some of that goes back to uh, my model,
All
right?
right.
One thing that a lot of people have brought up is that you know this pandemic, including social distancing, has caused a lot of mental health challenges for people, which is true, to a degree. But even if you take back to that model where the water is the stressor and the cup is the person,
Mm-hmm.
before the pandemic, before social distancing,
Yeah.
Right.
people had the water up to the brim.
Yeah.
So they
You
were
get what I'm saying?
already, yeah, yeah, yeah.
They were already there.
Okay.
They- So people were already dealing with anxiety and depression and things before the pandemic came.
Mm-hmm.
The pandemic added that extra stressor with, and then I don't have enough coping skills to deal with this, right?
Oh.
And some of the coping skills that they had were distractions.
Mm.
And I've heard you say this a couple times, that the pandemic has just gotten rid of distractions,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So if I needed a distraction to not focus on my marriage, if
Now,
I needed work to not
oh.
focus on my marriage, if I needed to be able to go out to eat, to not focus on that I really don't feel good, if I need to be around a whole lot of people
Mm-hmm.
just to focus so that I don't have to focus on my insides and
Mm-hmm.
how I actually feel,
Mm-hmm.
those distractions are gone.
Yeah.
It's silent.
So let me just kind of follow up. So some of the problem that you've mentioned is one, people may have used distraction as a coping mechanism for the stressors that they already had, but then the pandemic added a stressor and then removed the distractions that were a part of the coping mechanism.
Absolutely. Especially in
Wow.
but distractions in its own is a coping mechanism, but it's doesn't make it bad or good. It's a coping mechanism.
Okay.
So it's either healthy or unhealthy. The way
Okay.
we cope is either healthy or unhealthy. It's not necessarily good or bad. For some people, certain distractions are healthy for them.
Sure.
For they're still able to address things that's going on, but they create that balance.
Mm.
Right? There's balance in their life.
Okay.
But when that's the only thing I do is distract, and I never pay attention to the root cause of things in my life,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
then that's not a healthy way of dealing with stress.
Oh my goodness. Mercy, mercy. And let me ask you this, kind of along those same lines. How do you believe that the stay at home orders have affected the psychology of families?
Yeah, so they're having to stay in with their with their families more, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and so, kind of going back to that same model, if I didn't want to be at home,
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
I'm at home now. But
Sure.
and it's not all bad though,
Sure,
right?
sure.
For a lot of people, this has been, you know, considering of course the deaths, we do not, we definitely don't condone, and there's been some terrible things that's happened as a result of COVID-19. But for some people, the removal of distractions, they were able to focus in with their families, and this has been a great time to rebuild a connection with their spouses, with their kids.
Hmm.
So it hasn't been all negative. It's just how have you been able to cope with other stresses in your life? Because COVID-19 and social distancing and staying at home is not the only stress that people are dealing with.
Right.
There's other things as well. Some people still have to go to work,
Hmm.
go into work, is what I'm saying.
Hmm.
So there's still other stressors that's going on. What I'm interested in is kind of how we are now. The We're at a point where the stay-at-home order is lifting in different areas,
Hmm.
and for the people that were dealing with a lot of anxiety
Mm-hmm.
before the pandemic, and now their anxiety has heightened. Them getting back in with society can may be a challenge, right? Of if it depends on how severe it is. If I don't want to leave the house at all, that might really impede on my daily living, right? So now it's becoming a problem or issue. So as we get back and start mingling with people, making sure people have the right amount of coping skills to deal with the stressors as they walk around and talk to people again, and
Hmm.
developing that new normal, as you said,
Hmm.
because that will take some time as well.
What are some things that you would suggest for marriages during this time, some mental health solutions for them during this time, even for, just those couples that are married, because, on the one side, there have been some reports of, even domestic violence going up, which,
Yeah.
is probably even an indication that because of that, there's probably more, arguments and things of that nature. What are some, solutions that you would suggest for married couples and even for families?
Some solutions.
Yes, sir.
Let's see. So I'm big about communicating and talking about identifying what challenges are going on. So assessment is really big. And if you have the time to assess and talk to your spouse about what's going well in your relationship and maybe areas that you want to work on, then that's a way of growing. Also, individually, being able to identify and manage your own emotions, right?
Exactly.
Because when I'm able to identify and manage my own emotions and what's going on for me, then I'm better suited to communicate with other people. All right. So uh, let's go into a technique, something to keep in mind. All right. So as stressors increase, we have to be able to handle these stressors, right? So I need to be in tune with myself and how I feel and how I handle certain emotions.
Hmm.
When I'm not able to do that, sometimes I take those emotions and I might spew it on you in a form of criticism, right?
Mm.
And so criticism is a way where I talk about who you are as opposed to the situation of what's going on, right? It's different than complaint, different than criticism is different than a complaint. So when I'm able to identify how I'm feeling, right? If I'm angry at something about this situation, if I feel sad, if I feel down about not being able to go out, I can identify that emotion and draw a line to why I'm feeling that. And that emotion doesn't become displaced on somebody else that I do care about.
This
Yeah,
is powerful, man.
that's good.
Wow,
That's good.
wow.
That's good.
Let me get you one more, and I don't know if Demetrius has any more, but I know we've got a few from some of those who are streaming. What about for ministers, pastors, ministry leaders? What are some kind of tips that you would give to us during this time as well?
They all need counselors and therapists. And
Certainly, certainly. I know I need one. Yes, sir.
yeah, but to all reality though, connection. All right. I mean, people can definitely put ministers and pastors on a pedestal, but it's something else when you step on that pedestal. Right. So
Mm.
don't box yourself in.
Right.
Make sure that you're able to connect with people in a genuine way, in a way that's meaningful. Also, exercise the muscle of utilizing that two-letter word, no.
All right. All right.
Oh my.
One of the biggest things for a lot of people that is in ministry and pastors is burnout.
Mm.
Okay, so
Not know how to say no.
Not
exercising that muscle of no. I love that.
no,
Good.
no.
That's good.
I
That's
love
good.
that.
Hey, let's go back then to that marriage piece you talk about as far as assessing where you're at. And I know I was reading something, you sent out emails, and you talked a little bit about an assessment that you are offering for those who are seriously dating as well as married. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's an assessment done by the Gottman Institute. It's a checkup that they call it. And one thing that I've been doing for the month of May are allowing couples to take this assessment. And the assessment, it lasts about an hour or so. It's pretty thorough. It talks about all aspects of the relationship. The rules are you do not talk about the assessment when you're taking it, before you're taking it, after you take it.
Okay.
Um, each person gets an email. The assessment is sent to them individually. They take it. After they take it, there's scores and things that are sent to me, and I come and we process what the assessment is saying. Not that just areas that you need to work on, but also strengths.
Sure.
And that's one thing to focus on in a relationship and a marriage. And I've been focused more on that on with some of the couples that I'm working with is what is working in your relationship as opposed to what's not working.
Okay.
Because we can